Gemma Sou, University of Manchester. We're really only just learning about the impact Hurricane Irma has had on the Caribbean, especially for residents of disaster-affected areas. How can we tell their stories, and ensure their voices and experiences are not ignored? Here are 4 things the media could focus on. 1. Remember that locals get it worse. Local Caribbean residents are the real losers, not the tourists. They haven't had a flight delayed, cancelled, or temporarily inconvenienced by a hurricane. Instead, they have had their lives, livelihoods, and homes devastated, and recovery will be a protracted process that will take many years. The poorest and most marginalized populations across the region will be the most affected. Irma's unequal impacts are starkly illustrated by looking at Richard Branson's Necker Island, which is part of the British Virgin Islands BVI. Most of the buildings on Necker and other BVI islands were destroyed or badly damaged in the hurricane. Branson himself, however, was able to safely hunker down in his private cellar while Irma wreaked havoc too. Disasters are not natural location, or the severity of hazards cannot sufficiently explain why Irma had such a severe impact. There needs to be an acknowledgement of why Caribbean nations are far more vulnerable to natural hazards than the U.S. This requires a long, hard look at the political and economic situation of these islands. For example, several reports have raised worries over the heavy reliance on a handful of sectors, such as agriculture and tourism, which will be severely impacted by Irma in the long term. Countries with diverse economies are better able to recover following a disaster, but Caribbean countries will find recovery far more challenging, given their low economic diversity. However, reports of destroyed hotels or ruined crops also conveniently ignore local history. As Leon Seeley Huggins, an expert in Caribbean development based at the University of Warwick, points out, these economies were effectively forced to restructure economically towards these sectors, in light of a debt crisis that was largely due to their insertion into an unequal global system following independence. News reports should expose this side of the Caribbean's colonial history, and add to the argument that Britain, France, and the Netherlands, in particular, should be doing more to help. 3. Local civil society helps out. If coverage of previous large disasters is anything to go by, we are about to see an influx of images of distressed Caribbeans being saved, rescued, and cared for by international relief organizations. However, it is important to stress that local civil society is often heavily involved. These may be formal, already established organizations, or they may be grassroots groups that form spontaneously in the wake of disaster. Following Typhoon Haiyan, for instance, a huge cyclone that devastated the Philippines in 2015, 2 local NGOs, Coastal Corps International and the Center for Empowerment and Resource Development, were able to exploit their local knowledge and work effectively alongside the government. This sort of collaboration is crucial. Local and international organizations mustn't work in silos. 4. Media needs to have more sticking power. Too often, there is a media frenzy of physical destruction and human agony, and a focus on short-term relief operations. This will draw attention to the disaster, and likely galvanize many charity donations from overseas. However, it will also serve to turn the disaster into a spectacle, and the slow process of rebuilding roofs or clearing trees from roads isn't much of a spectacle. More attention must be given to long-term recovery. This is often forgotten about, and public engagement dries up. Granted, disaster recovery is not as sexy as response and relief. However, this phase is absolutely critical, and is an opportunity to recover society in a way that meets the needs of local people. Gemma Sou, lecturer in disaster management, University of Manchester. This article was originally published on The Conversation. Read the original article.